তোমাদের যে দুটো কবিতা এখানে সেট করা হয়েছে, একটা হচ্ছে রিভলভিং ডেইজ, আর সেকেন্ড যেটা আছে সেটা হচ্ছে ওয়াইল্ড লেমন্স। দুটো কবিতার প্যাটার্ন কিন্তু দুরকম। মানে if we think about the first one, that is the revolving days, this is obviously a type of poem that actually concentrates mostly on something individualistic. That means something private. It is not a kind of a public poem written for the public domain, or rather it is not a kind of a poem that actually celebrates or rather discusses on the basic orientations of Australia in general. So the first poem that is in our syllabus, that is the Revolving Days, it is a kind of retrospective poem, a kind of poem that actually relieves the past. I will come to the poem later. The second poem, that is Wild Lemons. Now, Wild Lemons, this particular poem is directly associated with the typical public orientations. So that's why to read and understand this particular poem, that is Wild Lemons, we need to know something about Australia. We need to know something about the Australian history, the Australian Aboriginals, the kind of colonialism, the history of colonialism, what actually happened to them, what does the dream actually signify, that is the Australian dream, and other things. Okay, so this is a kind of a, obviously it is the basic orientation has been provided with a kind of history, and at the same time the past and present and memory and desire always being in work in the poem like the Wild Lemons. But the first one, as I mentioned just now, Revolving Days, this is something very much personal. Okay, but before going to the poem in detail, before going to interpret the poem in detail, let us consider, let us think about the history of Australian colonialism. You know that so far as the history of colonialism is concerned, we find that Australia is being generally considered to be a penal colony. You know what is penal colony? The term penal colony actually signifies that the settlers who actually settled in Australia, they are coming from England mostly, and other parts or other segments of England. But the persons who actually entered Australia, they were considered to be the convicts. What happened, in Bengali there was a term like Dipanjan. Probably তোমরা শুনেছো দীপান্তর শব্দটা। আমাদের এখানে যেটা হতো যে কালা পানির জন্য, হ্যাঁ, সেটা তোমরা সেই দীপান্তর হতো দেখতে, সে আমাদের আন্দামানে পাঠানো হতো আমাদের এদিক থেকে। Generally what happened, that at that particular time when the history of settlement or history of settling into the new countries, it actually came to the forefront. At that very time, at that very moment, we found that in England or the other segments of England, the convicts were in abundance. প্রচুর আর কি convicts সেই জায়গাটাতে বেশি হয়ে গেছে, এবং তখন সেই সমস্ত কনভিক্টসদেরকে পাঠিয়ে দেওয়া হয় অস্ট্রেলিয়া। কারণ ওই জায়গাটাকে তুমি যদি একটু হিস্ট্রি অফ কলোনিয়ালিজম ইন অস্ট্রেলিয়া একটু ভালো করে পড়ো, তাহলে দেখবে যে ওরা একটা শব্দকে ইউজ করছে, যে শব্দটার মানে হচ্ছে, বা শব্দটা আমি বলছি, ইট ইজ কল্ড টেরা নালিস। আই রিপিট, টেরা, TERA নালিস, NULLIS. What does it mean, টেরা নালিস? If you go with the history of colonialism in Australia, you will find that terra nullius, this particular term actually indicated, this particular term actually meant a completely uninhabited place. So that's why they actually treated Australia as if like a terra nullius, a completely uninhabited place টু বি অকিউপাইড বাই দ্য আউটসাইডার্স, মানে ব্যাপারটা এরকম যেন যেটা ফাঁকা জায়গা পড়ে রয়েছে, যাও তোমরা যাও, ওখানে গিয়ে তোমরা বসতি স্থাপন করো এবং ওখানে গিয়ে বসবাস করো। Now the problem what happened, what occurred at that very time, as you can see here, that the persons who actually entered Australia, যেটা আমি তোমাদের এক্ষুনি বলছিলাম, যে যারা ওখানে গিয়ে পৌঁছাচ্ছে তারা কিন্তু আদপেও কোনো খুব একটা মানে ভদ্র মানুষজন নয়। এবং তুমি যদি অস্ট্রেলিয়াকে ভালো করে দেখো, তুমি দেখবে যে ইট ইজ exposed to the seas from all segments or all sides, সমস্ত দিক থেকে কিন্তু ওই কনভিক্টসরা ওই জায়গাটায় গিয়ে পৌঁছাচ্ছে। এবং আমি যেটা বলছিলাম যে the particular focus, the particular question or maybe the form of interrogation that is lying there, it is lying with its particular term terrenalis. That means তুমি যখন বলে দিচ্ছ যে এই প্লেসটা হচ্ছে টেরানালিস, তুমি যখন বলে দিচ্ছ যে এই প্লেসটা হচ্ছে কমপ্লিটলি আনইনহ্যাবিটেড ল্যান্ড, সেখানে কেউ থাকে না এবং তুমি শুধু সেখানে যাবে এবং বসতি স্থাপন করে থেকে যাবে, সেটা কিন্তু একটু প্রবলেম্যাটিক হচ্ছে। কারণ তুমি সেখানে ইরেজ করে দিচ্ছ এনি পার্টিকুলার পসিবিলিটি অফ প্রেজেন্স। ওকে, মানে এর আগে যারা ছিল তাদের পসিবিলিটিটা তুমি মানে থাকার পসিবিলিটি নেগেট করে দিচ্ছ, তাদের থাকার পসিবিলিটি তুমি ইরেজ করছো। বাট হোয়াট হ্যাপেন্ড, that if you read about Australia, if you read about the typical Australian Aboriginal literature, but typical Australian indigenous literature today, এটা কিছুদিন আগে পর্যন্ত তাদের ট্রেস পাওয়া যেত না, তাহলে তুমি জানতে পারবে যে ওখানকার কিন্তু একটা মানে এই যে বললাম অ্যাবরিজিনাল সংস্কৃতি, বা ধরো ওখানকার যারা ইন্ডিজিনাস পিপল যারা ছিলেন তারা কিন্তু ওখানে সেটেল করছেন মানে কয়েকশো কয়েক হাজার বছর ধরে। তাহলে এরা কোথায় গেল নরমালি? এবং তুমি সেখানে দেখতে পাবে যে যখন এই সেটেলার্সরা যখন ওই চতুর্দিক দিয়ে ওখানে গিয়ে পৌঁছাচ্ছে, তখন কিন্তু একদম ভয়ানক রকম ভাবে এক্সটর্শন এবং তার সঙ্গে সঙ্গে তুমি ধরো মানে কোয়ারশন চলছে আর কি। হ্যাঁ, মানে অকিউপাই করছে প্লেসেস গুলো এবং তাদের থেকে নানা রকম ভাবে অত্যাচার চলছে। এবং আলটিমেটলি যেটা হয়েছিল যে ওখানকার যারা অ্যাবরিজিনালস বা যারা ইন্ডিজিনাস পিপল, তারা প্রথমত ওই ভেতর দিককার জঙ্গলগুলোর মধ্যে গিয়ে লুকিয়ে পড়ছে। ওকে, তাহলে যেটা বলছিলাম যে ওখানকার যারা অ্যাবরিজিনাল যারা ছিল তাদেরকে কিন্তু তোমার একটা মানে গ্রুপস এর মতো ছোট ছোট পকেটস এর মধ্যে ওরা ঢুকে যাচ্ছে এবং এরা গিয়ে ওখানে সেটেলমেন্ট করছে, মানে সেটেল করছে, মানে যারা আর কি বাইরের দিককার লোকজন। জাস্ট একটা জিনিস মাথায় রাখো যে ওদের চেহারাগত কিন্তু ভয়ানক রকম পরিবর্তন রয়েছে। If you consider in terms of the aboriginals and if you consider in terms of the settlers, এই দুজনের কিন্তু চেহারাগত পার্থক্য আছে। এই চেহারাগত পরিবর্তনগুলো কিন্তু এমনি এমনি আসেনি। এই অরিজিন গুলো, আমি বলছি না যে আলটিমেটলি তারা হয়তো ট্রুয়েস্ট একটা ব্লাড নিয়ে চলছে, বাট আলটিমেটলি তুমি এখান থেকে আইডেন্টিফাই করতে পারো যে these are the two types, okay, these are the two patterns of people who actually lived in Australia during that particular time. Okay, মানে একদল হচ্ছে তোমার অ্যাবরিজিনালস, একদল হচ্ছে তোমার ইন্ডিজিনাস পিপল, আর একদল হচ্ছে যারা সেটলার্স যারা বাইরে থেকে আসছে। এরা কিন্তু মানে এই ধরনের ইন্ডিজিনাস পিপল যারা এরা কিন্তু ক্রিশ্চিয়ানস ছিল না, এরা কিন্তু পেগান ছিল। এবং যখন এরা এসে পৌঁছাচ্ছে মানে সেটলার্সরা এসে পৌঁছাচ্ছে, তখন ওই কিছু হচ্ছে কি যে কিছু কিছু বাচ্চা কাচ্চাগুলোকে ধরে নিয়ে আসছে, ওদের বাড়িতে এনে কাজকর্ম করাচ্ছে এবং পরবর্তীকালে যেটা দেখা যাচ্ছে যে ওদের তোমার ক্রিশ্চিয়ানাইজেশন হচ্ছে। তাই অনেক ক্ষেত্রে আমরা দেখতে পাই যে বেশ কিছু অস্ট্রেলিয়ান পারসনস মানে বিশেষ করে অ্যাবরিজিনাল রাইটার যারা বা ইন্ডিজিনাস পিপল, যেমন ধরো একজনের নাম হচ্ছে উডারগু নানিউকাল, হ্যাঁ, বা একজন আছে তোমার তোমার উডগেরু নাডুগিল. So these are the names of the aboriginal names of some authors or writers of Australia. Now what happens, that after the baptism, after Christianization, তাদের কিন্তু আবার ডিফারেন্ট নামকরণ ছিল। ক্যাথ ওয়াকার ফর এক্সাম্পল, এটা একটা নাম তাদের। এবার যখন আমরা অস্ট্রেলিয়ান লিটারেচার নিয়ে পড়তে যাই ইন জেনারেল, তখন আমরা দেখি যে একটা পার্টিকুলার টাইম পিরিয়ড পর্যন্ত কিন্তু অস্ট্রেলিয়ান লিটারেচারকে তোমার কলোনিয়াল বা পোস্ট কলোনিয়াল লিটারেচারের অ্যাম্বিটের মধ্যে আনা হয়নি। হ্যাঁ, অনেক পরে মানে এই যে নিউজিল্যান্ড, অস্ট্রেলিয়া, হ্যাঁ, যে আফ্রো ক্যারিবিয়ান পার্টস গুলো, ঠিক আছে, বা ক্যানাডিয়ান লিটারেচার, Today, these are considered to be the part of post-colonial literature. কিন্তু প্রথম দিককার যে post-colonial literature তার মধ্যে কিন্তু তোমাদের এই ধরনের লেখাগুলো কিন্তু ছিল না। আমি যদিও বলছি যে because we are reading David Malouf, okay, and Malouf is mostly famous for his poems, but ultimately an imaginary life. That is very famous text actually that is written by David Malouf, and তার সঙ্গে এডি হোপ and others সবকিছু রয়েছে। না আমি তোমাদের কিছুটা অংশ একটু পড়ি, মানে আমি টেক্সটটাতে আসছি পরে। I am reading from the Worldview edition of a Warble of Postcolonial Voices, Volume 2, by Someshwar Sati. The title of the essay is Memory, Imagination, History and Identity, David Malouf's Writing and the Postcolonial. So ultimately here, আমি কেন বলছি এই এসেটাও important, just because the title actually prefigures 4 terms. Number 1, it is memory. Number 2, it is imagination. Number 3, it is history. And number 4, it is identity. এই চারটে টার্মে কিন্তু প্রচন্ড ভাইটাল কিসের জন্য? তোমার কবিতাগুলোকে প্রপার ওয়েতে ইন্টারপ্রেট করার জন্য। Okay, so the 4 terms that I have just mentioned, memory, imagination, history and identity, all these 4 terms are very important and significant. Why? Because when you are thinking in terms of your memory, when you have lost something, right, যখন তুমি কোনো কিছু হারাও তখন কিন্তু তোমার মেমোরিটার প্রয়োজন পড়ে, right? And someone you see that whenever it is the orientations of post-colonialism, always we find that memory plays a big role. Okay, why? Because you will find that somehow when you are experiencing some existential crisis, when you are experiencing some problem, okay, at that very moment you will find that somehow the old times were good or better in comparison with the present one that we are leading at this very moment. The second one is the imagination, and when you will suffer from any particular kind of crisis, whether it is existential crisis, financial crisis, sociological crisis, cultural crisis, you know, in each and every moment you will feel the alienation, and at that very moment imagination will lead you to your dream. Actually the dream, you know, Australian dream, that is very significant. I will come to that later when I will discuss on the second poem, that is the Wild Lemons. Then I will tell you something about the concept of dream and something. Then there is a particular formation of history. Now what happens, you know, in general, whenever we enter into a colonial or rather post-colonial discourse, what happens? History plays a big role. How? Because when a colonist actually comes, just consider this particular term, that when the colonist comes, the first thing that the colonist has to do has to erase your history. Because your history may be, say, think about India. The complete history of India could not be erased by the Britishers. It was not possible for them. Why? Because it was something written. The main history of India, it was written, mostly written. And that's why it was not possible very easily. The Britishers or the Westerners couldn't just erase your history and tell you something different. But to some extent, it has been changed. It has been, you know, to some extent, it has been polluted. Obviously, some part was missing, and now it has been considered that India knew nothing, and now the West actually made them learn everything, and that it's the particular kind of orientation that have been provided. But in some of the cases where the history was not so much large and so much documented like India, it was very easy for the colonists to just erase the history. So therefore, history is very significant and important, just to keep your own culture intact, just to keep your own heritage intact. Okay, so history is therefore providing you the identity. So history and identity both are interrelated, because this particular orientation of identity is always being associated with something positive. You see, each and every person is suffering from a kind of identity crisis, and when there is a matter with identity crisis, certainly you will find, obviously, that somehow that colonial and post-colonial orientations are always working in terms of the identity and the identity crisis that is present. So let us read the essay that had been written by Dipanjan. What is written there? Perhaps one of the most visible qualities of what constitutes Australian literature is that it characteristically expresses collective and representative values. The primary aspiration of Australian literature, of both its original Aboriginal inhabitants, I have already mentioned about the term Aboriginal. The Aboriginal or the indigenous inhabitants are those who actually lived there before the settlers came, okay, who were bearing the mark of exploitation. So they are the Aboriginal inhabitants, and its later settler community appears to be integration rather than its opposite in different ways. The white Australian writing community has forged its sense of self as deriving from or in opposition to a metropolitan cultural center located in Europe, primarily England, and a consciousness of itself as a settler community celebrating pioneer values and a love for the land. Okay, so that was the fundamental focus that has been provided here. What it says the white Australian writing community has forged its sense of self as deriving from or in opposition to a metropolitan cultural center located in Europe, and a consciousness of itself as a settler community. For the Aboriginal community, story, song, myth, and legend have been a way to articulate relationships to people and to the land. For the modern indigenous people, written literature has allowed them to claim a space for themselves and a sense of belonging and cohesion in the face of threats of erosion to their culture. At the time of first contact with the Europeans, the Australian Aboriginals didn't have a written language. That was very significant. As I have already mentioned about the history, so therefore you will find certainly that when there was no particular formation of written language, that will be very problematic to keep your history intact. But their chants and songs and stories and legends constitute a complex and rich oral tradition. The essentially ceremonial function of the oral Aboriginal tradition supports the fundamental Aboriginal beliefs. The chanting and the songs, the stories, the legends in the oral form, these are actually keeping your history intact in the formation of the oral form. One of these is the idea of the dreaming. It is very significant, as I have just mentioned. The idea of dreaming is very important in case of Australia and Australian Aboriginal writing. Here it has been pointed out that dreaming is a term used by the Aborigines to describe the relations and balance between the spiritual, natural, and the moral elements of the world. Now, when you cannot just keep them to some extent associated with each other in reality, you dream. And with the formation of the dream, you are trying to keep the relations intact. You are trying to create a balance between the spiritual, natural, and moral elements of the world. The idea suggests that what is given cannot be changed, and that the past exists in an eternal present. So ultimately, that's why they actually traced the kind of relation, they actually trace the kind of link between the past and the present. What it says, the idea suggests that what is given cannot be changed. Okay? What is given cannot be changed, and therefore it says, and that the past exists in an eternal present. And it serves to relate the individual and the landscape to the continuing spiritual influence of the dreaming. Dreaming about what? Dreaming about a mythological past in which the existing natural environment was shaped and humanized by ancestral beings. So up to this. So this is very significant and very important part of the Australian temperament of writing. Okay? Where you will find that past exists in the eternal present, and that particular past and the present, it serves to relate the individual and the landscape to the continuing spiritual influence of the dreaming. And in this particular form, a mythological past will be created in which the existing natural environment was shaped and humanized by ancestral beings. So whenever you will enter into any particular formation of literature, specifically Aboriginal literature, you will find that the Aboriginal stories have to do with land, journeys, travels, and are performative in nature. Okay, so that's why in these particular formations of literature, you will find certainly that somehow the past and present, the present and past, the intermingling of the past and present, how past is been working in terms of the present. So all these things have been pointed out by these authors in general. Now, I'm skipping a bit, and then there is a particular section, that it has been pointed out that the most impressive novelist of the early 20th century was Henry Richardson, okay, and with books like Morris Gast and the 3-volume The Fortunes of Richard Mahoney. Okay, the names have been provided, and here it has been pointed out that the Depression years directed attention back to the comparable hardship of the early 1890s and confirmed the defining virtues of Australian cultural mythology. This cultural mythology and the basic orientations of mythology that have been found to be present in the formation of writing, all these are very significant in Australian culture and Australian writing in general. So an idea that took root in this period was the romantic notion of the spirit of place and the importance for writers of what could be retrieved of Aboriginal culture. This gave rise to the movement, actually it's called the Jindi Warble movement, whose goal was the emancipation of Australian art from the alien influence. Now the alien influence is to be considered as, the alien influence is being pointed out by the Western influence actually. Okay, after the Second World War, the particular orientation has certainly got changed, okay. And then there is a particular reference to David Malouf, and ultimately you will find what Malouf is actually working on. So I am not going to that particular detail in general. Now I am entering into the particular poem that is in your syllabus. So please go through the particular section where the critical responses of Malouf, the influence of Malouf's writings. Okay, so all these on the theme of migrancy, the significance of memory, these are very important topics for your writing, obviously. Migrancy, that migration. All these terms say reference to the migration, reference to history, reference to dream, reference to past, the significance of memory, how memory is working in the writing of Malouf. So everything is very significant and important for the 2 poems that are in your syllabus. The first one is the Revolving Days and the second one is obviously the Wild Lemons. Now let us consider the first one, that is the Revolving Days, okay. Today I will complete this particular poem, and in our next class we will do with the next poem, that is Wild Lemons. Obviously it was the Wild Lemon for Don Dunstan, the kind of poem it has been pointed out. It was a bit complex, but the first one, that is Revolving Days, it is, as I mentioned just now, it is somehow a kind of poem that actually tells us about some personal feelings, some personal orientation and something. Okay, in that particular note it has been pointed out that this particular poem was first published, that is I'm actually talking about the Revolving Days, and it has been pointed out in the notes section. This poem was first published in the volume Typewriter Music. Okay, that was the name of the collection actually, in 2007, and then as the title poem of the collection Revolving Days in 2008. Now if you think about the title Revolving Days, what does it mean? So when it's a matter with a revolve, it actually refers to a kind of repetition is there, right? When you are thinking in terms of something revolving, that means in a recurrently something is recurring, okay, something is repeating. So that is called revolving. When something is in your life, it has now gone, and again it will come to your life again. So therefore, the title, as the note here points out, that the title punningly plays on, that is revolving days, the idea of number 1, return, number 2, recurrence, number 3, recuperation, and number 4, it is repetition. I repeat, return, recurrence, recuperation, repetition. So whenever you will read this poem, that is Revolving Days by David Malouf, you will find that all these 4 terms can be incorporated in this particular poem, because the term revolving is actually giving us the hint towards these 4 terms: return, recurrence, recuperation, and repetition. Now what happens, when is the matter with the concept of revolving? Ultimately you will find that it is not stating in terms of a linear movement. Rather, it is giving us a hint towards the pattern of circularity. Okay, that means in a circular way something is being repeated. Doors and thresholds are the boundaries of newly demarcated space, but the spatial characteristics of revolving doors is that they allow for large number of people to pass through simultaneously. The revolving days of the title may refer to the permittability of past and present. So that means when it is the matter with revolving, ultimately you will find that it is indicating toward the recurring past in present. So ultimately the time framework is always in work. At one time you will find it is referring to the past and then the present. So ultimately you will find that in the present the past is in work. So something, in a repetitive motion. So therefore the revolving days of the title may refer to the permeability of past and present, the constant revisiting of the past. It could also refer to echoes of past felt in the present. So what actually happened in your past, and now you are feeling the same. The same echo is being felt by you in the present. So the past and present, present and past, all these things are taken into consideration here. And you can identify that it is the constant revisiting of the past. That means how past is being present and how present is being motivated or present has been influenced by the past. It could also refer to echoes of the past felt in the present. One also has the sense of the turning over and examining of the past almost as an object that one scrutinizes over and over in order to understand it. That means it's a kind of a retrospection, therefore. So this particular form of introspection and retrospection can also be associated with this particular poem altogether. Okay? So let us begin the poem then. What it says. It begins in this particular fashion. That year, I had nowhere to go. So when the poem actually refers to any particular, or the poem actually begins with a particular formation of demonstrative, that year, I had nowhere to go. So it is actually, you can identify that the demonstrative that and I had nowhere to go, ultimately you will understand, you will identify that the primary focus of this particular poem, the time sequence that the poem is describing on, it is indicating to be of past, remote past to some extent. And that's why the I had nowhere to go. Okay, কোথাও যাওয়ার ছিল না আমার সেই সময়টাতে. And therefore he continues, that year I had nowhere to go. I fell in love. As I've already mentioned, that the Revolving Days, it is a poem of retrospection. It is a poem where you are reliving the past. And ultimately, at the same time, you have to keep it in mind that the poem is actually focusing on the kind of feeling and temperament that you had, the kind of feeling and temperament that you have experienced for love. So it is a very personal poem. At the same time, you will find how it is motivating the speaker still. So that year, I had nowhere to go. I fell in love. A mistake, of course, but it lasted and has lasted. Now, this particular kind of a tense that have been incorporated, the verbal sections, as you see, what it says, it was a mistake, of course. So kind of, to some extent, at the present time, during this present, you will find certainly that the poet is actually behaving, he is actually commenting on the particular pattern of love, the particular kind of relationship that he had, and he considers them as a mistake, of course. So it is indicating that the love affair has not been concluded happily. And then it says, but in spite of the negativity, in spite of the kind of, the kind of negative result, okay, it lasted and it has lasted. So ultimately, this particular time frame, one is indicating of the past, and the second one is indicating of the present perfect form. So that means actually the impact is always present. So again, you will find that the past and present is in work. So that's why it is the memory, the living roots of memory that you are facing at the present instant. So that's why it says, that year I had nowhere to go. I fell in love, a mistake, of course, but it lasted and has lasted. The old tug at the heart, okay? The tug of war that it was there, and the old tug at the heart. So ultimately, it was something in terms of the past and the kind of feeling and temperament that you had. Okay, the kind of feeling that that is being associated with your feelings and with your mindset and at your heart, actually. So therefore, it says the old tug at the heart, the grace unasked for, urgencies that boom under the pocket of a shirt. So that is nothing but a kind of a feeling and the kind of emotion that you had, and that particular kind of emotion has been reciprocated. The emotion has been pointed in terms of some objective equivalent or object equivalent. It says the old tug at heart, the grace unasked for, urgencies that boom under the pocket of a shirt. So why there is a pocket of a shirt? Because behind the pocket of a shirt there lies your heart. And ultimately you can feel the urgency, you can feel the pulse beat, you can feel the basic essences that you feel at the time of your affair. What I remember now, not the inherent forms, rather I can remember the shards. So what I remember, actually it is the exterior part. Not I am feeling the inner part, but I am feeling the exterior part now. I do remember all these things. So therefore it says, what I remember is the color of the shards. I had brought them as an experiment in ways of seeing myself, hoping to catch in a window as I passed what I was to be in my new life as lover. So therefore, here the shard is being metaphorically or symbolically oriented. What it says, shard represents your exterior. Shard represents your outlook. Shard represents your conscious self. And ultimately, each and every moment you are trying to showing this off so that it may be looked, it may be noticed by your beloved. So therefore, each and every moment you are, this is actually indicating towards different kinds of masks that you are wearing in front of your beloved, so that she can feel, she can identify you as something, a positive lover, a good lover, or something like that. So each and every moment you are just wearing shirts. So these wearing shirts of different colors, these are actually indicating towards, the different kinds of outlook and different kinds of exterior semblances, something. Therefore, it says that I bought them as an experiment in ways of seeing myself, hoping to catch. So what was my hope? I was hoping to catch in a window as I passed what I was to be in my new life as lover. So what I was in reality and what I had become as a new lover, by wearing those shirts. That was the fundamental change that I wanted to make her identify. And then the colors have been pointed out, one mint green, one pink, the third called Ivy League tan with darker stripes, my first button down collar. So again, the button down collar, why it is called the button down collar? So is it indicating that it's a new kind of shirt that you are wearing, or rather it is indicating that you are not of that particular type, rather you are just trying to put on something that can make you a different person in response to the beloved, in response to the love affair that you have. So these are the colors that have been pointed out. These are obviously referring to the exterior part of you. And therefore the mint green, therefore the pink, therefore the third one, that is Ivy League. What is Ivy League? Here in the note section it has been provided. Ivy League, it is a group of 8 old distinguished American colleges and universities in the East, known for their ivy-covered brick buildings. Okay, the members of the Ivy League are Brown, Columbia, Cornell, Harvard, Princeton, Yale Universities, Dartmouth College, and University of Pennsylvania. So why this Ivy League has been incorporated here? The reference is to a clothing style actually, which is traditional, aspirational, and upper class. The contemporary equivalent would be the preppy style of dressing. So it's a kind of a dressing habit. That's why the Ivy League has been incorporated here. So, that at the very first or opening stanza up to the first 10 lines, you will probably identify that somehow the speaker of this particular poem, that is the poem Revolving Days, he is actually prefiguring, he is actually commenting on the past experiences regarding the affair that he had at the time. Now he is considering it as if like a mistake, but at the same time he is considering them that the impact of that particular love affair cannot be negated. Okay, though it was something that is I have done probably mistakenly, because I was trying to just change myself, I was trying to change my exterior and become a new man, but ultimately I couldn't probably. And but in spite of all these negativities, I can always think, I can say actually that its impact on me was great. And now at the present instant, in the present scenario, in the present time, I cannot negate its impact on me. That means I can still feel the essences, I can still feel the kind of emotion and feeling that I had, though the exterior is something that I do remember most. Then in the next stanza, it becomes very much focused. It is more expressive in this particular form. What it says, we never write. Here we, you can identify that we is actually referring to the lover and his beloved. He says, we never write, but sometimes knotting my tie at a mirror, one of those selves I had expected stepped into the room. So somehow it was not me, rather it was a part of me. It was not my original self, rather one created self. We never write to each other, but sometimes what happens, knotting my tie at a mirror is very significant, because mirror actually makes you clear that what you are in reality. Okay, but sometimes you see that the mirror actually reflects your outlook, but sometimes when you are alone, the mirror will reflect the original self of yours. So here it says that, but sometimes knotting my tie at a mirror, one of those selves I had expected steps into the room. That means the kind of selves are actually referring to his own selves, the different kinds of selves. So these are the fractured orientations that have been provided. And at the same time, you can find that the fragmented orientation is always being in work. So we never write, but sometimes knotting my tie at a mirror, one of those selves I had expected steps into the room. Okay, so stepping into the room. In the next room, you are waiting. We have not yet taken back the life we promised to pour into each other's mouths forever and forever, while I choose between changes to surprise you. So here you will find that the rooms again incorporated. Now, what are the rooms? The rooms, okay, you can go with the literal interpretation of the rooms. You will say, okay, when I am coming into the drawing room, now I am just wearing one particular self of mine, and in the next room, that is the inner room, I see that the lady is waiting, and when I was going there, I choose something, you know, a kind of a change in me that could surprise you. So do you consider that this particular kind of change that can surprise the beloved is referring to the originality? Okay, that is the significant term. Here it is said, we never write, but sometimes knotting my tie at a mirror, one of those selves I had expected steps into the room. Then in the next room, you are waiting. And then within the bracket it is written, we have not yet taken back the life we promised. So ultimately, the particular time period, the particular moment that it actually underscores, it actually says the particular moment when the breakup was not being complete. The kind of promise that we promised to each other, the kind of life that we promised to each other, okay, something positive, something, you know, it's a kind of a dream life to come. So it was not, you know, completely being broken up to this. We have not yet taken back the life we promised to pour into each other's mouths forever and forever. You see that this forever, this particular, it's something cliched term, but ultimately you will find that somehow whenever there is a matter with the two lovers, whenever there is a matter with the future dreams of two lovers, the term forever and forever, you will find the terms have been broken. The first forever refers to the time sequence. And the second one, forever, this is indicating again that the particular kind of a break is being there. So ultimately, typographically, you will identify that the first forever was united and the second one is broken. So ultimately, it is pointing the typographical orientation. It is actually pointing us towards the break within this particular kind of a dream. Okay, forever, united, it was a dream. Forever, now it is separated. So this particular separation is actually indicating towards your dream. Okay, the breaking of the dream actually. Next room, you were waiting. We haven't yet taken back the life we promised to pour into each other's mouths forever and forever. এটা অবশ্যই এটা আমরা ভাবতে পারি যে ultimately each other's mouths এটা কিন্তু একে অন্যের মুখ হিসেবে বোঝাচ্ছে আর কি। এটা আমি জানি না যে whether it is indicated or not, but ultimately the first forever is the poets and the second forever it is referring to the beloveds. Okay, দুটো মাউথকে হয়তো ইন্ডিকেট করতে পারে, বাট এটা একটু ফার ফেচেড হয়ে যাচ্ছে আর কি। যাই হোক, সো in the next room you are waiting while I choose between changes to surprise you. That means I considered myself, I chose not to be in a particular position to, you know, express myself in terms of my exterior semblances. Rather, I want to express myself in my original form, and that's why it becomes something surprising to you. So that's why it actually indicates that the relationship actually broken and they got separated with each other. And now here it is the matter with the present. Okay, the last stanza is referring to the present. What is happening at this moment? It says Revolving Days. So that is the title of this poem, we know very well. And ultimately I have told you everything about the Revolving Days, what it means, what it indicates, the particular 4 terms that have been pointed out by this editor, that is the return, recurrence, recuperation and repetition, the particular kind of circularity. But I will obviously tell you about the concept of memory that will come after this particular section. So therefore it says the Revolving Days, that though what I have actually understood, I do remember everything, it was telling us something about my past, but now it is been present, because now at the present instant I can remember them. I can find that it is actually working within my mind. It is reworking a kind of recurring notions is in work. My heart in my mouth again. That means what I felt at the time. Okay, the kind of, you know, the words and verbiage that came as a form of my language. Okay, what I felt being expressed in the form of language. Now again, my heart in my mouth again. That means I will say everything. I will write something that will discuss something about my feeling. That's why the heart comes to the mouth. I am writing this for you. Okay, that is something very striking. In the previous stanza, it was written, we never write for each other. Now it is writing, it's been written that I am writing this for you. So ultimately for you, I am doing something. Wherever you are, whoever is staring into your blue eyes, that is obviously something despairing, because it says that there must be some person who is actually staring to the beloved, staring into the blue eyes of the beloved, okay, that he used to do in the past, but now it has been changed, certainly. So wherever you are and whoever is staring into your blue eyes, it is me, I am still here. No, don't worry. I won't appear out of that old time to discomfort you. So I am present, truly. But don't consider that I am coming out just like my old self. I am the lover. Okay, that particular self is broken, you see. That particular self is dead. I am not coming here to discomfort you. And no, at this distance, I am not holding my breath for a reply. I don't want a reply from you. So that was the fundamental notion that David Malouf is propagating here. Now, in the notes section, some important segmentations have been done by the editor. I am reading that particular section. Here it is written that memory, which is such a significant aspect of Malouf's work, plays an important role in this poem too. As I've already mentioned, that the memory plays a big role. Okay? And here in this particular poem, we find that somehow the past and present and past, all these things have been incorporated, and therefore it has been stated that the memory, it plays an important role in this poem too, as the past is recounted and re-examined, leading eventually to a sense of acceptance. The poem begins with that year, immediately gesturing to the past. But by the end of the first line, and in the "and has lasted," there is establishing of the idea of continuity into the present. So the past is present, actually. The repetition of lasted, of course, ties it in with the entire notion of recurrence. The fact that mistake of falling in love has lasted suggests with gentle irony. That means probably the feeling is still present within him. That the mistake may not be one at all, or may be perceived as one because of the unrequited nature of the emotion experience. So what kind of love it is? It is the unrequited love. That is, it is not being reciprocated by the beloved. It's one-sided, therefore. So that's why the continuous search, or maybe as it is the unrequited. So therefore, ultimately, you will find the intensity of passion is no less, actually. Okay. What follows is, in typically witty and elegant Maloofian verse, a catalogue of the urgencies and aspirations of the younger poet persona. The yearning as well as the physical manifestation of new love in the exhilarated booming heartbeat. The sensuous detail in the recounting of physical objects is also typical of Malouf's style, as the speaker remembers the hope and optimism which he invested in his new appeal. The second stanza establishes the aftermath of the affair in contrast to the breathless anticipation of the last lines of the preceding stanza. Okay, now it is, it's a kind of an aftermath being incorporated. The star, we never write, gives note of the ill-fated trajectory of the relationships, because it is actually indicating towards something negative. And yet the past is not dead or finished. In that the speaker asserts that every now and then he experiences the same emotions and expectations over again. And it is this revisitation of the past that prompts the letter to the former beloved. The poem ends with the urban self-depreciatory wit so typical of Malouf, as he states his intention of not confronting his beloved like a difficult ghost from the past, but at the same time also asserts his acceptance of his rejection with a gentle and acerbic maturity. Now, what is indicated here, the very next stanza, very next paragraph of this particular entry, it is actually indicating about the personal life of David Malouf. Now, what happens, that in case of David Malouf, in the biography of David Malouf, though if we consider the poem from a different orientation, though we consider this particular poem from some new critical angle, then we probably will not consider this particular appeal. But fundamentally, as we know, some bioliterary critics and some post-structural orientations have always been provided some extra importance or extra emphasis to David Malouf's life. So therefore, the kind of homosexual orientation that is always been in work can be traced or can be identified here too. So now in this particular entry, it has been written that David Malouf's homosexual orientation is one that he has never tried to conceal, but never sensationalized either. The addressee of the poem could be of either sex. That means it could be the female, it could be male altogether. Now, what happens, that it was quite similar to that of Shakespeare's sonnet number 18. There also we have traced that the speaker, the addressee, might be a male or maybe a female, because we know that it was addressed to Mr. W.H. But fundamentally, here also you can identify that the addressee could be a male, could be a female either, okay? However, that fact is unimportant in the face of the very real and urgent communication of emotion in the poem. The poem is a love poem, it is true, okay? But it is also a poem about memory, number one, time, number two, loss, number three, acceptance, number four, and understanding. I repeat, memory, time, loss, acceptance, understanding. In an interview, Malouf said of the poem, what he states with this particular interview, I will end this particular discussion. Malouf said, one of the great things about when you get very old is that you can look back on your youth and its follies with a certain kind of affectionate irony. What you have done in your early life, it seems to be very much, it creates some kind of laughter in you, okay? It's the affectionate irony that you have, and that is partly what this poem does, while wanting to say that nothing we ever feel entirely gets lost. So how can you negate the kind of feeling that actually charmed you at the time? You can negate the love affair, but the kind of good times that it actually gives to you, the kind of feeling and kind of emotion that it actually gave you, how can you negate them? Okay? At the time, these were very important for you. So therefore, he says that it doesn't have to have a later action in our lives to retain a sort of later resonance. And that is partly what this poem is about. It is about, again, the wholeness of who we are. It is called the Revolving Days, you see. So ultimately, in the form of retrospection, in the form of the reliving your past, in the form of you returning to your past, recurring your past, or repetition of your past, ultimately you are just commenting on the past at the present. So with this particular formation, the poem actually ends here. Okay.